Hello and welcome back to History with Mr. Roberts. Okay, so today I'm reading a newspaper here from the 10th of April 1940. So that can mean only one thing, that we are learning about the Nazi invasion of Denmark and Norway. So in this video we're going to answer several questions. Why did the Germans invade Denmark and Norway? What was the benefit for them? Why did Hitler make that decision? Why was it such a disaster for Britain and for France? And why was it also a major disaster for the German Navy? Now, we're also going to get into why did events in Norway mean that Winston Churchill became Prime Minister. We've got so much to cover today, and we've done a lot of reading to get us there. So I'll put all the books that I've read down in the video below so you can see what I've been reading and get some top tips on good content to read on this topic. Anyway, let's jump straight in. Okay, so why did the Nazis want to invade Denmark and Norway? Well, Denmark was a staging area, kind of almost like a forward area for their forces to be able to get across to Norway. But the key thing about Norway was resources. Now, at this time, Germany's been doing a lot of rearmament, building tanks, planes, submarines, and warship. It needs a lot of iron, it needs a lot of steel. Now, most of that comes from various sources. Germany's getting some from France, around 5 million tons of it, metric tons, about 1938. But when the war breaks out, that supply from France vanishes immediately. Now, the only other place, aside from Spain, where small amounts come from, is Sweden. Now, as you can see from this map, at the very top of Sweden is two mines, Gullivar and Kiruna. Now, those two mines are producing a lot of iron ore. Now, Germany is taking about 90% of Sweden's iron ore. That iron ore goes by train across the border into Norway. It leaves the port of Narvik. It travels down through Norwegian territorial waters, back to Germany, back to the smelting plants, back to the factories to build those armaments. Now you'll see down the Baltic coast, there's a lighter grey line. Now that obviously is the Baltic, but the problem with the Baltic is it does freeze in winter in places. There'll be a lot of pack ice, and that is why the Germans want to secure the Norwegian coastline to enable them to be able to ship those exports in the summer. Now Hitler knows that the French and the British probably have plans to disrupt that trade and to make sure that those exports from Sweden do not get into Norway and then to Germany. So that's the key reason why Hitler wants to invade Norway. Now, there are plenty more reasons that we'll discover in the video, but that's the primary one. Okay, so another reason why Hitler and the regime wanted to take Norway and Denmark was for the Kriegsmarine. Now you can see here a line taking a warship out from northern Germany, from Wilhelmshaven or Kiel, out into the Atlantic. Now by securing Denmark and Norway, you can also allow ships to leave through the Baltic, through the Danish Straits and out into the Atlantic. And also you can get ships to go out from Trondheim, from Narvik, Bergen. It really does broaden Kriegsmarine operations. Now, another thing is it prevents the threat of a blockade. So remember from the First World War, the British coming out of Scapa Flow, they put a blockade in place, and that traps the German ships in the North Sea. It means they can't get out of the North Sea or in the English Channel, and if they do, they run into severe resistance from the Royal Navy, which is much, much stronger than the Kriegsmarine. Now, for a while now, there have been lots of people pushing Hitler to make this decision about Norway. So we see a photo here of Erich Raeder. He's the Grand Admiral of the Kriegsmarine. Now, he's speaking with Hitler. He's been pushing a lot for Hitler to occupy Norway, to allow him and his Kriegsmarine greater span of operations into the North Sea and out into the Atlantic. Now, lucky enough for Hitler, he had some support inside Norway. So here's a photo here of Vidkun Quisling. Now, you might recognize the name Quisling. So it's a word we use today to mean someone who's turned their back on their country or been a traitor, so Quisling. Now, Vidkun Quisling led a very, very small political party in Norway. It had almost no support, less than 2% of the vote. It was called National Samling, or National Gathering, National Unity. Now, he visited Hitler in December 1938, and he urged Hitler to occupy Norway to see off the threat from Britain. Now, of course, there was a lot of collaboration between Vidkun Quisling and Hitler when the invasion came. So he was clearly pushing on an open door with some members of the Norwegian society. Now, another reason why Hitler wanted to invade Denmark and Norway was to see off the threat from Britain and France. Now, Britain and France both had a plan called R4. You can see here a propaganda film from Germany showing boats and planes landing in Denmark and Norway, occupying. Now, the Germans then used this video to insinuate that British forces would then move south and invade Germany proper with bombing campaigns onto Berlin. Now, this is why Hitler wanted to thwart this threat by taking those two countries. Now, Hitler's already made the decision to invade on the 14th of December 1939, but on the 19th of February 1940, he orders his generals to make detailed planning. But events in the North Sea take a turn. So on the 16th to the 17th of February, a British ship, the HMS Cossack, takes control of a German tanker, Altmark. Now, in doing so, they rescue 300 Allied troops, but they do kill 8 German soldiers. Now, this gives Hitler everything he needs. This gives him his red flag to then begin the invasion. Okay, so let's now look at Operation Weserübung. Now, this began on the 9th of April 1940. Now, the key thing to remember is it was a huge operation. The Kriegsmarine were involved, the Luftwaffe, and the Wehrmacht were involved. Now, this was a really coordinated operation. Hitler was really micromanaging the invasion. But let's rewind a little bit and find out what was happening a couple of days before the invasion. So on the German front, all leave was cancelled. Now, this was especially happening in the Kriegsmarine, especially in the U-boat arm. So Admiral Donitz has sent all of his U-boats out into the North Sea. Now, they had orders on water-soluble paper. Now, they were told not to open those orders until they received the code word Harmut from the German HQ. Now, they received that message on the 6th of April. They opened their orders and they could see that the invasion was planned. This is when the U-boats and the rest of the Kriegsmarine started to move into position. Now, there were already a lot of ships around Norway, posing a danger and a threat. Now, the Royal Navy at first misread the situation and thought that the German Navy were doing a breakout into the North Sea and potentially out into the Atlantic. They weren't yet sure that an invasion was happening. Now, a couple of days before the invasion, Winston Churchill, who was First Lord of the Admiralty, had been planning Operation Wilfred. Now, Operation Wilfred was an operation where they were going to mine the waters around Norway. And by doing this, they would hopefully provoke a reaction from Germany, and potentially Germany would invade Norway or take some military action, which would then give the British and the French the license that they needed to be able to take Norway, potentially occupy Sweden and Denmark as well, to face down the German threat. Now, as you can see from this map, the invasion went through Denmark, it then went into Norway. It was done by land and by sea. Some of the biggest ships in the German Navy were involved, so the likes of the Gleisenhow, the Scharnhorst, the Blücher, really, really big cruisers and battleships and troop transports. The Luftwaffe were heavily involved. They were helping to do airborne invasion around some of the cities in Norway. Now, during this time, there was huge bombing raids over different parts of Norway. But first of all, let's look at what happened in Denmark. We're going to watch a small clip now from an American journalist. Let's see what happened in Denmark.
40. The German army rolled across the neutral borders of Little Denmark, and in a matter of hours it occupied the entire country. By nightfall, Denmark is erased as a nation, and the Danes go into slavery. Although only 6 months before, Hitler had announced, "We have concluded a non-aggression pact with Denmark."
Now, of course, that invasion of Denmark took only 6 hours. Now, we can see here a photo. This is some of the leaflets that were dropped over Copenhagen. Now, the German royal family and the government decided that, having seen the scenes in Warsaw, they wanted at all costs to avoid mass bombing of Copenhagen. These leaflets were dropped telling people that the German forces were invading to protect them from British aggression. Now, of course, the invasion happened very rapidly. We have to remember that Denmark had a very small military, only about 8,000 troops. And this is why sometimes today this is known as the 6-hour war. This was indeed Germany's shortest military campaign of the Second World War. Okay, so now that Denmark's been taken, we're going to turn our attention to Norway. So we're going to watch a short clip just seen some of the scenes from the invasion of Norway. Now, after Denmark's taken, forces advanced straight into Norway. Let's take a look. Now, whilst this video looks really dramatic with the German Kriegsmarine pushing its way through the North Sea, it is very, very deceptive. Germany here looks really, really powerful, but the Norwegian campaign was a catastrophe for Germany. They lost a cruiser and a battleship, and they also lost 10 destroyers. Now, those 10 destroyers were half of the entire German destroyer fleet. Now, when you compare that to the Allies, so Britain, Poland and France, Poland lost a destroyer, France lost a destroyer, and Britain lost 7 destroyers. But the difference is stark. For Britain, they had 164 destroyers that they could deploy. So the amount of assets that Britain had in play from a naval perspective in the Norwegian campaign was very small indeed. Now, another important event happened when the German Navy tried to take Oslo. So the big cruiser, the Blücher, worked its way up the Norwegian fjord, up Oslo Fjord to try and take Oslo. Now, obviously, it was trying to get there as fast as possible to try and take control of the government, to try and seize the royal family. But they were fired upon by a coastal artillery. Now, ironically, the coastal artillery had really old German guns by Krupp, and they were like 46 years old. But that attack on Blücher holed the ship, a big explosion in the armaments compartments of the ship. Now, between 700 and 800 German sailors and soldiers died. Now, because of the sinking, that slowed down the rest of the invasion fleet behind. Now, that gave the Norwegian royal family and the Norwegian government the chance to get away. They boarded planes, trains, and automobiles, and they got out of Oslo just in time. Now, as the Nazis eventually make their way to Oslo, a very brave man called C.J. Hambro, he's the president of the Storting, or the Norwegian parliament. Now, he's a Jewish man, so he knows what could await him when the Nazis arrive. Now, strangely, he's also the Norwegian translator for the book by Sinclair Lewis, It Can't Happen Here. Now, it's a very famous book. It's about, it's a fiction book around an American fascist dictator. Now, he makes the executive decision to evacuate the royal family, so King Haakon the Seventh pictured here, and Crown Prince Olav. You can see this photo in Molde in northern Norway. He makes a decision to get the royal family and the government out of Oslo and to get them north as fast as possible. Now, they flee Oslo in a set of trains and cars, but also with them goes the Norwegian treasury. Now, 50 tons of gold are evacuated on trains and on planes and eventually make their way to northern Norway, and then eventually shipped to Britain and then eventually onward to America. Now, out of the 50 tons of gold, all that's missing at the end of the evacuation is 296 gold coins. Now, we believe those were lost in the sheer panic of trying to get them out of northern Norway. So while the Germans were invading, what were the Allies up to? So France, Britain and Poland sent their armies into Norway. They made landings at various locations in central and northern Norway. Now, these landings took place between the 14th and the 19th of April. So they took some strategic locations. They made their way inland. They took control of the port of Narvik, which is obviously very strategically important for Germany and getting its iron ore from Sweden across the border out of Narvik and then back to Germany. Now, things did not go well for the Allied forces. There was a lot of disagreements and confusion between the French and the British. Cooperation at this stage of the war was not great, and that's something we see later on in Dunkirk. Now, because of this confusing way of doing war together, what then happened was they did their best, but Operation Alphabet was authorized on the 24th of May. Now, this was the evacuation of Allied forces, especially from the area around Narvik. Now, that was completed on the 8th of June, 1940. But as you can see from this map, British forces were doing other things. So on the 11th of May, Operation Valentine saw the invasion of the Faroe Islands by the British. And also Operation Fork saw the invasion of Iceland. So 750 Royal Marines landed on Iceland. Now, Iceland was under British control until much later in the war, in 1941, when it was handed over to the United States. But really, when you look at the British and French and Polish campaign in Norway, it was a disaster. And from this disaster, obviously, it had huge ramifications back in Britain, which we'll turn to now. Now, events in Norway are so catastrophic, it becomes known as a debacle. And the problem for the Prime Minister, Sir Neville Chamberlain, is that he starts to lose support. So there's a vote in the House of Commons. The government's majority is slashed from 213 to 80. Now, Chamberlain then knows that he can no longer go on. Lord Halifax, who's in the Lords, knows he can't be PM, so people turn to Sir Winston Churchill, First Lord of Admiralty. And on the 10th of May, 1940, he becomes British Prime Minister. Now, while Churchill becomes Prime Minister, events in Norway continue. So people are trying to get out of Norway. So the royal family and the government make it onto a warship. They start making their way over to Britain. And so does another man. So this man is called Nordahl Greig. He's a very famous Norwegian poet. He was also the second in command of getting the gold out of Norway and to Britain. Now, he's one of my favourite poets. The great thing about poetry is you can really get to the heart of history. You can really get a sense of how people felt. And his poem is really emotional. It really gives them a feeling of gives you a feeling as a reader of what it was like to be trying to escape a country that you love. And you're looking back and you're hoping that one day it will be free again. Now, I've got his first edition book. This was published in 1944. Now, unfortunately, he died in 1943. He was a war correspondent and he was shot down over Berlin. So I'm going to read out the poem. I'm not going to be on camera while I do this. I just want you to listen in, but let's give it a go. May 17th, 1940, a poem by Nordahl Greig. Bare today is the flagstaff where Eidsvoll's trees show green, but never as now have we fathomed what the blessings of freedom mean. A song through the land is swelling, of victory's hour it spoke, that only by closed lips whispered under the foreign yoke. A faith has been born within us, freedom and life we find, all won by a need as simple as breathing to humankind. We have felt the menace of bondage and gasped in a stifling throe, like men in a sunken U-boat, and we will not perish so. Worse than the flaming cities is the war which no man sees, which spreads a slimy poison on meadows and snow and trees. By terror and base informing, a plague in our homes is set, but the dreams we have dreamed were other, and these we cannot forget. Our lands, our seas with their harvests, were won through a long-drawn strife, and the labour has bred affection and a weakness for growing life. Define the signs about us, we founded our hopes on peace, and those whose work is destruction may sneer at us if they please. We fight for the right of breathing, now but a day shall be, when Norsemen shall breathe together, the end of a land set free. From our friends in the south we are parted, from pale and worn out men. We have pledged you our word of honour, that we will return again. Here we recall the fallen, who brought with their lives our peace, the soldier in blood-stained snowdrifts, the sailor beneath the seas. So few are we in our country, we are kin with all our slain, and the dead shall be beside us, the day we return again. But unfortunately for Norway, those words in 1940 seem very far away, and they offer hope to the Norwegian people, but the reality is that the German occupation has begun. Now, throughout the war, there'll be hundreds of thousands of German troops occupying Norway. And as you can see here from the video, this is in the final days of the invasion, when the Nazis begin to secure the port around Narvik, and when British and French and Polish troops have withdrawn with the news that there is an invasion into Belgium, the Netherlands and France. Okay, so the occupation of both Norway and Denmark was very traumatic for both countries. Norway more so, because the violence was inflicted by the Nazis on the Norwegian people and the battle with resistance. Now, both countries had collaborationist members who collaborated with the Nazis, as we'll see later on in France and some of the other occupied territories. But it wasn't all bad news. There was amazing, brave people in both Norway and Denmark. We'll do a separate, deeper video on Telemark itself and on the Danish rescue attempts to help save Danish Jews. But people often ask me, the heroes of Telemark, is it a true story? Yes, it is. But the film The Heroes of Telemark has taken some liberties with some of the romantic stories. They've also avoided some of the terrible conditions the resistance fighters were facing, and also the deaths of 18 civilians on a ferry that was sunk to prevent the delivery of heavy water to Nazi Germany. Now, heavy water, or deuterium oxide, is actually a chemical that's used to build an atom bomb. So the commandos that destroyed the Norsk hydro facility did slow down German attempts to build an atom bomb. So we must be very, very grateful for that. But we'll do a separate video for that. I recommend the film. It's on Amazon Prime. Go and check it out. Okay, so what have we learned from this video? Well, the first thing is Hitler invaded Denmark and Norway to secure iron ore resources. Now, he also went in to be able to give a bigger field of operations for the Kriegsmarine to secure access to the North Sea and the Atlantic. Now, Britain and France had their own invasion plans for Norway, but they suffered from very poor planning, not only in Narvik, but even before the campaign. They really misread German intentions. Now, Denmark was invaded first of all. They were defeated in less than 6 hours. But we have to remember Denmark was a very small country, a very small military. Now, German forces were delayed in actually getting to Oslo. Their cruiser, the Brugge, was destroyed in the fjord. Now, that gave time for the government to escape. Now, in Norway, obviously there were fifth columnists and people who wanted to collaborate with Hitler, such as Vidkun Quisling. But once that invasion had happened in the west, that's when British, French and Polish forces decided they had to pull out of Norway. Now, despite the Allied losses, the result was a huge catastrophe for the Kriegsmarine. They lost so much shipping, which probably prevented them from being able to invade Britain later in the war. And of course, the main piece that we should take away from this is the fact that Chamberlain had to step down as Prime Minister and Winston Churchill became the wartime Prime Minister. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this week's video. If you like the video, please do subscribe. It means a great deal. Spread the word so we can reach more people. Next week, we're going to be looking at the fall of France. So after the invasion of Holland and Belgium, the attack on France, why did France collapse in 6 weeks? I've already started a lot of reading on this, one of my favourite books on the fall of France. We've also got some old books that will make us understand what it was like to experience the collapse of France. And we're actually reading some books in French to help us understand what was things like from the Vichy perspective. So this is a book written in the 1940s by a fascist in Vichy who supported the Germans. So if you want to know why France collapsed in 6 weeks, tune into my next video. See you then.